Don't leave it to me to assign motives, but I believe that somebody started looking at 2012 and thinking, oh my golly, we got all these retired people out there and we're going to do this $20 a month to them and kill them and all of these teachers. I can't help but think that way. You know, politicians think that way.
I don't think a day goes by I don't talk to teachers. I think a day probably doesn't go by anybody in this room doesn't talk to teachers. But because I guess we didn't talk to particular teachers that have a particular position, well, maybe, wait a minute, let me back up there. They're not even teachers. They're representatives. They're organization, association officials that feel slighted because they weren't talked to.
And I don't really care what her reasons are. I don't really care what the reasons we may have here for wanting to override. The override gives us a second chance to do what we ought to do, and that is before we hand this plan off to somebody else and dump it, to get it fixed, stabilized for a long-term basis.
Now, you say that you're changing from 80 to 20 to 70 to 30. Now, that doesn't mean anything to a lot of people, but for someone like me who's in medicine, we see that a lot. And what happens, you look at the 80% of healthcare costs are borne by 17% of the people in North Carolina, and those 17% are the elderly and the disabled. And so you're saying to a population who's going to wind up going to the hospital more often than the rest of us, that now you're going to add an additional 10% to their bill. And so you say someone goes in for a colonoscopy that's going to cost them $10,000. Instead of them paying $2,000 out of pocket, they're now going to pay $3,000 out of pocket. After we promised them when they first started that if you come and do your job as a state employee, that we're going to protect you in the years that you're your most vulnerable. I think that's not fair. I think it's not principled. And I think we as a chamber and as a body are principled people, and we should stand up for what we believe in and protect our retirees.